Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus Today. Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about my early morning cough. I'd like to talk about what are the leading indicators of a failed state or a state that's in the process of decline, in the process of failure. What are the signs? Now, we could look at, say, a business or a company, and we can see similar things on a smaller scale, of course. But I want to talk about some businesses that companies, multinational type size companies that I've worked for over the years, and where the signs, as I became more experienced, the signs of decline and decay and dissipation and indeed collapse were already there. Now, as a younger guy, I didn't see them for what they were, but as I got a bit older and I got around a bit more and had more experience, I realized that those actually were the signs of decay and collapse, and that the collapse of those organizations was inevitable, and the signs are actually all around. So let's have a look at some of that. Now, I see these same signs happening all over the West, as in all over the Western polities today. Wherever the globalists are in control, these signs of decline and I think, assuming that the current trends continue, collapse is inevitable. Now, it doesn't mean that a trend that's in place today will remain, in place forever. There are situations where things can be reversed. They don't happen that often, but they do happen. So let's have a look at what some of those signs are. Now, there was an organisation that the government wanted to create a new competitor in the marketplace and create more competition. Good, okay, nothing wrong with that. That's good. Government wants to create a new competitor, and so what they did was to rather than provide sort of commercial assistance, they just thought, well, we'll throw money at them. We'll protect them from competition in certain areas of the country and in certain places. We'll give them money. We'll give them free real estate. We'll do this. We'll do that, and that'll help them. Now, that assumes then that these guys will use that to best advantage. But instead, they whenever government hands that out, they want favours in return. Can you employ my friends and my relatives and my mistresses? And no, I want them to have prestigious sounding jobs on big money. And so the company, the company who's getting this sort of government help, taxpayer dollars being thrown at them and all sorts of benefits, they've got a choice. Either they take the government money and then with it they take the political interference and so on and so forth, or they refuse the help and try and go it alone. Now, it's hard to know which is the best way, but the government's initial idea is we want another competitor, and then giving having a very experienced, savvy interface between the taxpayer money that's being handed out and the endeavours that the organisation is getting up to, so that the money is spent directly on achieving commercial success. Rather than doing that, they just treat it as, here's taxpayer money, and by the way, we want to have a shitload of influence in the organisation. So they were saying, well, look, there's these were like smaller regional factories, things like that. So they were saying, okay, well, the government was saying, all right, well, there's an area of high unemployment here, so we want you to build one of those factories over there. And well, this is we want you to, we want you to employ. Okay, we want you to, in that factory, instead of having 100 workers, which is all you need, we want you to employ 1,000. Oh, no, we'll give you a bit more money. Don't worry, we'll hand out more taxpayer money. So really, there were a number of restraints or constraints on behaving as a commercial business. So that's one. Now, on top of that, the various the people that were the government forced this commercial business to employ were primarily public servants, various influence peddlers, people who had never actually had a job or done any work, who were just well connected to government and people of influence. So there were these various centres of influence peddling within the organisation, so that nobody knew actually who was in charge or who had the final say. It was very unclear. You had a nominal sort of the CEO and, all that sort of, the general manager and the vice president. You had all that was there. But some of these people were political hacks. Some were compromise candidates. So if the government influence peddler people said, well, look, we don't like that guy. We just want a little stuffed shirt stooge put in that role. Well, actually, we'd like a woman put in that role. Can you make sure she's brown? Do you mind? And this sort of thing. So that some people were actual decision-making, managers in the line of managers with authority. Others were just political hacks. Others were political influence peddlers who were getting their instructions from the political, the taxpayer trough from the boys downtown. And so it was very unclear who was in charge, and this could change. So it was rather dynamic. This could be the in-group today, but then these guys would lose favour, and that would be the in-group tomorrow. And so you had all these different people and departments all working really against each other, and nobody wanted anyone else to succeed, because if they did succeed, then they may gain more influence. So the job of this group was to undermine that group, and so on it went. And now the government's response, when things weren't working out too well, the government's response was to throw more money at them and to give them more protection and to work behind the scenes to put heavy pressure on various suppliers to give them better prices, and then in turn giving handouts to those taxpayer handouts to those suppliers. So it became this mosaic of non-accountability. Nobody was accountable. A lot of the people in there who were pulling strings were only accountable to their friends in government, or their senior goons in the public service that would run cover for them and protection for them. Would if one of the senior executives didn't quite toe the line, then he would find there was stories being leaked to the media about that he was a dirty, rotten, no good so and so, and so on. So now I'm a relatively junior manager, in fact, quite a junior manager, or section, I don't know, what would you call it, manager in this organisation. And my view is that my job is to run the department successfully and profitably. And even then, I thought that it was a commercial business, so it should be run along commercial lines. I was quite surprised about how unqualified so many people were that were being pushed in there. And there was there were signs of, it was a leftist government, ironically, that wanted more competition, but a leftist government, so they were already pushing, as indeed the trade unions who are involved there were pushing for what would have been nascent social equity programs and so on back then. Why can't we have equal amount of men and women, and why can't we have brown women, and what's wrong with that flamboyant gay guy being in and already those sorts of, and it wasn't out front, it was whispered very much behind the scenes, but the influence peddlers and so on. But the primary issues was that accountability, lines of reporting didn't exist. You didn't know that your boss was actually your boss. Somebody could come around and tell you what to do who wasn't your boss. You didn't report to them or have anything to do with them, but they could come. But because they were influential, they had the power that your direct boss would have, or the authority, if you like. But it was very nothing was formal. It was all sorts of mysterious. You had to be looked at through a miasma of uncertainty. So somebody come along and say, my name is such and such, and I'm in so and so, and I'm going to tell you what to do. And this person clearly had absolutely no understanding or knowledge of the business or the industry or the issues at hand or any of the mechanics of getting things in. But they had influence. And then you find that really they've got a senior friend in the public service who just happens to be have the ear of one of the key politicians. So they can make a few phone calls and suddenly you don't have a job, or you do, or you have a promotion, or you say, these sorts of things. And they had that power. So you had to treat everybody rather cautiously, and anyone that approached you and started to talk, do this, do that, you didn't know what sort of authority they actually had or who they knew, or whether they were acting on someone's behalf. Now, on top of that, as things started to sort of look like they weren't going the way they wanted to, the government, rather than realizing that it was their own approach that was causing much of the problem, their insistence on installing idiots into the top management, and rather than that, they assumed it was in effect sabotage. It was like Stalin's view that any of their fucked up policies didn't work. It must be sabotage, enemy of the people, and counter-revolutionary and all this sort of thing. And these politicians were thinking that way as well, or even the folks in the public service were thinking that way as well. So they would assume or took the view, convenient or otherwise, that there must be saboteurs in the midst. So you would have these, in effect, undercover agents, working on behalf of the government or whatever influence peddling entity, and they would be out there looking for these saboteurs and convinced that the saboteurs must be somewhere, but where? And so this was so everybody was convinced that everyone was spying on everyone else. No one trusted anybody. Nobody believed what anyone. If someone gave you an instruction, and you ideally wanted in writing or something, but gave you instruction, they could deny it either that same day, let alone the next day. No, I never said that. And so because everybody was running scared about if you pin your name onto a particular decision or initiative, then it could very easily be viewed with great hostility by others who had the power to fire you and so on. So anyway, this was the environment, and of course you didn't know the lines of reporting, you didn't know the accountability. So who was accountable for what and under what circumstances, and people would do anything, would turn themselves inside out to avoid being in a situation where they would have to take responsibility for something. So and you could have a number of head office type people come out every day, and one would say, well, I want you to move everything here to the left of the factory. And then the next one come, what are you doing? I'm moving to no, you have to move it to the right. No, you have to move it to the front or the back. And so everybody would come along with different, but they would all, if it suited them, deny it later on. So lines of accountability, transparency of decision making, and the lines of reporting, all these things. Whereas now, on top of that was the transparency of decision. So typically, I was used to somebody would say, well, the reason you're going to do this, I'm asking you to close the door when it's windy and cold outside, because that will stop the wind from coming in, which will in turn keep the working area warm. And so, it's very clear. This is what decision is. This is why. But this wasn't the case. So, okay, why do you want me to do that? Because I'm telling you to do it, Billy Bob. And maybe you don't have a job if you don't do what I say. That was the attitude. And so hardly endearing themselves, but there was no transparency on the decision making. And if I or anyone for that matter would attempt to discuss well, can we talk about this? No, and I don't have to. And I'm telling you what to do. So everyone was jumpy and nobody was prepared to talk. And if you were tried to say something simple like, can we discuss this? Then, back in the day, it would be the equivalent of, what are you, Hitler? I mean, that wasn't what they said, but the idea was that you are now the problem by asking questions or seeking clarification. You are now the problem. And, in modern parlance, that would mean you are now Hitler. And so back then it was just, you're a troublemaker sort of thing. or refusing to accept direction was another one they used to trot out a lot, and that was just by asking. So now it was clear to me, at least, that there was something really wrong with the place. Why was it not possible to have clear lines of reporting, clear lines of decision making, and transparency? This sort of thing. Why was that difficult? And it was because of the power political situation. People were far more concerned with nuking each other than they were of getting the job done. In fact, I don't think anybody there actually wanted the job to get done, or you get patches or pockets of it. And I remember sort of my boss's boss coming around, so, well, I want you to solve the problem of such and such. And I didn't know it was a problem. Well, I'm telling you it is. And so, all right, then, well, what would you like me to do? Oh, that's up to you. Well, again, I don't think it's a problem. Well, I don't care. It is a problem. I'm telling you to do something. And well, all right, then, okay, it's a problem. Can you then give me guidance? Your vast wisdom, boss. To tell me what you want me to do. Explain to me what the problem is, so then at least I've got some idea of what corrective action I have to take. Oh, it's not up to me. It's not up to me. And if you have to ask me, that means you're not the right person for the job. We'll have to get someone else. That type of thing. So anyway, that was the attitude. And within, I moved on. One of the suppliers to this company ended up offering me a job, so I took that. But it was inevitable that the thing was going to collapse, which it did, and the government got sick of throwing money at it, and the enterprise was losing more money and then more money and more money again. And in the end, when there was a change of government, the government said, "Hey, we're not going to keep on funding you. You've got to survive on your own merits." But they had no one there of ability who could turn it around or stem the losses or whatever. And so it was a complete disaster in the end. Losing vast sums of money. So there are those sorts of things. Now, fast forward some years. Now I'm the EVP at a company. Not as big, but still, doing R&D, manufacturing. It's quite in a high intellectual property, high tech sort of space. But it's the same sort of thing. Now the CEO is. I was a compromise candidate there that the various factions on the board of directors all cancelled. I've mentioned this a number of times before, cancelled out each other's candidates. So I was like the compromise one that nobody wanted, but nobody opposed at the same time. So therefore I kind of slipped through on the cracks of it all. But I came in and saw the same thing. There was no lines of reporting. There were all these influence peddlers and all these whisperers and accountability was the managerial process was unclear and vague, and there were all these different centers of authority and power and influence, and there was no decision making transparency. There was no accountability. People who were utterly useless were escaping accountability. People who were doing quite a decent job were disliked because they were showing up the others, and therefore they were under attack. All these sorts of things were going on, and I could see the same sort of problems that this other place had that I was mentioning a moment ago, and I think these are the common factors, and trying to eradicate the influence peddlers and instill direct lines of reporting. Almost nobody wanted that. Because in the confused miasma of the way things were, nobody was actually accountable, because you couldn't pin decisions on any person, because most things that happened were by whispering and influence peddling and back channels and that sort of thing. Very little of it was by direct sort of directive from your boss or from your manager. Now I tried to change that so it was clear and precise. And found that everybody from the board of directors to the CEO to everyone else was prepared to fight pitched battles with me to prevent that from happening. Because while things were confused and so on, then nobody was accountable, nobody was responsible. And there was a lot of people invested in that who wanted to keep it that way. Similarly, people couldn't be held accountable given the decision-making process was so everybody wants, particularly the female employees, they all wanted committees, these vague committees and subcommittees, and it was insane. Because some of the people were ex-public servants because they were friends of people who were friends of government, and there was all that sort of gravy training and patronage and nepotism and all sorts of things going on. So so the decision making was vague, but the accountability was also vague. But the decision making process didn't exist, and nobody wanted it to be otherwise. While it's all confused and vague, no one's responsible, and they can all avoid responsibility and use various devices such as committees and subcommittees. I mean, for fuck's sake, given the size of the company, there was one committee that was formed, and then they had a subcommittee, and then the subcommittee appointed a steering committee. I mean, fuck. So these were the sort of very public servicey type steering committee. These were the very public servicey type things that were happening at this organisation. But it was all in the public service. You can get away with it because you can just throw taxpayer dollars, but endless amounts of taxpayer dollars. But in a supposedly commercial environment, this thing wasn't going to fly. But trying to sit down with the board of directors and explain these things to them, they didn't want it. They wanted the arbitrary right to appoint their friends and relatives and mistresses into the company on well-paid, prestigious jobs. They all wanted that arbitrary discretion to do those sorts of things. And in order to have that discretion and to be able to install it without accountability, without it being noticed, without them being held responsible, then it had to be this miasma of uncertainty. But yet this very same miasma is what was bringing the business undone. But again, the having to fight pitched battles every day over just basics like this, it was quite draining, at the time. Now let's fast forward now to or move to the current day in the West. Now there was a time when government was accountable. There was the president, the prime minister, the government. Now, it wasn't a perfect system, by the way. No one's suggesting it was, but these were the accountable people. Sure, the public service was influential. Sure, big business and the military-industrial complex were influential, but there was the elected representatives still had real authority to do things and to tell business, you will do this, you will do that. We are the elected representatives of the people. And there was a very clear, or far more clear than this today, accountability. These people, these elected politicians worked for and represented the people. Was it perfect? No, but it was there, and you could tell that the media was not totally controlled by the government. Was there collaboration at times, and were they getting together, in back rooms and whispering to one? Sure, that did happen, but also the newspapers were independent at the point where they would go to the government and say, look, we've got a story about such and such, which would embarrass the government. We're going to run with it. Tell us why we shouldn't, and what's your position? We'll give you 24 hours to sort of come up with your narrative before we do it. Sometimes the government would say, look, can you give us a couple of days? We need to, all right, then 2 days, that's it. And so they didn't have the direct control over the media that they have today. Not that they didn't have some control, they did, the Operation Mockingbird and everything, but, with infiltrating the media with various government-controlled assets, sure, but there was still enough independence in the media to be able to talk about controversial issues, and you don't see that today. Now the power has shifted. From the time Western economies became debt financed, and there was no, the idea of balancing the budget was thrown out the window. So we're talking, particularly the late 90s, early 2000s here, and again, particularly since the early 90s after the Soviet communist state collapsed. We've seen a move to where the power rests with NGOs, the financial sector, and various influence peddlers and so on. So it's no longer in government. I mean, look at the quality of people in government now. Not only are they have got IQs of -5 million, they don't give a flying fuck about the people. or their accountability to the people. They're just flunkies, stooges, hacks, goons. So, and then you get someone like Trump who comes along and wants to be accountable to the people and deliver what the people want, and all of these influence peddlers everywhere are going after him and trying to bring him down. So I see the same signs. There's very unclear accountability. The government doesn't represent the people anymore. Their bosses are the globalists who give them the instructions. The elected representatives pretend that they're government, but they're not. They're just a bunch of enablers and implementers for the globalists. The boys, they're just bagmen. Western governments now are just bagmen for the boys downtown, and the decision-making process is not transparent. Lines of accountability don't exist. Lines of reporting don't exist, as in the government, responding to the wishes and needs of the people. So I see all these things as, in a much more macro sense, anyway, as being all the signs of societal collapse. No one's taking responsibility. It's not clear what's going on. There's too many centres of influence that are not necessarily competing with one another, but are all hell bent on serving their own in-group interests. And this is bringing about, I think, all the signs and hallmarks and leading indicators of societal collapse into what, if it continues, into what will be a failed state. That's all across the West, in my view. You've been Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.